Here we go. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Don't you look handsome, all dressed up?
Lovely. But I did put on my new Aloha shirt for you.
I love it. I love it. Listen, thank you so much for doing this at the last minute, because you were on my list and I didn't know how I was going to handle. We already had like a ton of speakers and people were calling me, but I knew I was going to have you as a bonus, whether you knew it or not. I knew it.
Okay.
You are a bonus. You're just a bonus. It's just the way it goes. Well, I wanted to start by let's just roll, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I wanted to start, David, by, well, first of all, thanking you for being with us. And I wanted to let you know that in preparation for this moment, for us being together, in preparation, I got to adjust my screen here. In preparation for this moment, I read 50 things you can do. Is it 50 things?
50 ways to save the ocean.
50 ways. Because I wrote 50 things and then I said, wait a sec, no, it's 50 ways to save the ocean. And I did read Saved by the Sea. And I learned so much. Actually, I knew a lot about saving the sea. But your Saved by the Sea was such a beautiful book, and it made me realize how you got to where you are. And you can see the dots being connected to where you started and to where you are now. So can we just do some highlights, do some markers to say this happened, and next thing you know, you're ahead of Blue Frontiers and running a Blue Vision Summit and affecting policy in the United States?
Sure. I mean, I think like lots of people, I sort of fell early for the ocean, lived by the shore, the North Shore on Long Island Sound growing up, and always pestered my mom to take us to Jones Beach. And, was as a kid, thought I'd grow up and be a frogman and save dolphins in America. And when I got a little older, thought I'd be an oceanographer. And one of those transformative moments was when I was 15. My mom took my sister and me down to the Florida Keys, and looking out at that kind of aquamarine, clear, warm water, I felt like I'd come home to a place I'd never been before. And really until then, I'd been sort of PO'd. I thought I was a generation too soon to visit alien worlds. And then I got a mask and snorkel down in Key West and went off the seawall. And there's, colored rocks, living coral, and shoaling fish, and a little hammerhead I saw, and a turtle. And suddenly I realized there's an alien world right off our shores, and kind of got hooked, and would have gone on and followed my dreams, but I got kind of distracted by the moments and movements of my youth of the 60s and protest, and then became a journalist, went off to cover the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and then spent the next 30 years in this schizophrenic state of going off to cover wars and epidemics or politics, or work as a private eye in order to get home to the beach and go body surfing. So let's see, in the 90s, I wrote a book on the environmental backlash, War Against the Greens, and then it took me another 5 or 10 years to finally write the book I wanted to on the oceans. First book, Blue Frontier, sort of used my investigative skills to look at the waste, fraud, and corruption that was endangering our public seas. And at that point, when Blue Frontier came out around 2002, I just lost a life's love, dive partner Nancy, and I didn't know what to do next. I thought this was when George Bush was ginning up to invade Iraq, so I thought I'd go back to war reporting, because I knew from experience that was a good antidote to depression. And then I got a call out of the blue from Ralph Nader, who read the book. And the last chapter is called The Seaweed Rebels, the Marine Grassroots. And he asked me if anybody was organizing them. And I called around, realized I wouldn't be stepping on anybody's toes or flippers. And thinking about it, I felt like we're always going to have wars. We may not always have coral reefs or kelp forest or marine wildlife unless we do something to turn the tide. So after years, even as a reporter, always trying to cover the ocean and find ways back to it, I realized I'd start trying to educate people around the problems and try and do something about it by helping folks school together more effectively, which is what Blue Frontier is about.
What you're doing is you're creating a platform for everybody to get together and to share ideas. And I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you attract such high-level people. I don't know how... when I was at the Blue Vision Summit, when I saw the caliber of people who are there, who are really making a difference, I mean, it's really incredible. And I want to know how you even came up with this idea of the Blue Vision Summit, and how you bring all of these incredible people together.
Well, it's just, one-on-one. I mean, social networking is great, social media, but you have to just open up to what people are doing. The frustrating thing to me, the reason I'm more frustrated than despairing about ocean problems, is we know what the solutions are. And in 30 plus years as a journalist, every time I had an excuse to go back to looking at the state of the ocean, I'd find local people engaged in bottom-up solutions. And some of those folks have gone on to, 30 years later, be heads of our national ocean policy program, or I wrote a book on the Coast Guard, rescue warriors, and discovered that there's a lot of seaweed rebels who've come up through the ranks who joined the Coasties because they wanted to give something back, and are now, leading. You talk about marine protected areas. These are people who protect them. When I did Blue Frontier, I interviewed, Senator John Kerry, who was at the time working on restoring Boston Harbor with the Deer Island water treatment plant, and talking about swamp fox and how the American Revolution owed its life to some wetlands. And now he's Secretary of State. He's the first Secretary of State to really promote these marine protected areas and work at the global level to go after IUU, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, pirate fishing. Essentially, this is where organized crime is overlinking with industrial fishing and illegal fishing and human trafficking. And so basically, you just we're going to have to do it from the bottom up and the top down. And so we have the Blue Vision Summit essentially to bring hundreds of these local, regional, national folks together to work around our public seas. And at the same time, the Peter Benchley Ocean Awards identify both grassroots activists, what we call heroes of the sea, but also national stewardship. We've given it to 4 heads of state today from Latin America, Africa, and Europe, and Oceania. And, the effort is really that we know what the solutions are. We need to create the networks to start getting people to, as I said, school together in order to be more effective. I don't know if we'll turn the tide in time. All I know is if we don't try, we lose. And it's just, it ain't worth the risk. So many of us come to the ocean through our love. I mean, when I wrote 50 Ways to Save the Ocean, number 1 is go to the beach, because you protect what you love.
Yeah. What really struck me when I went to the Blue Vision Summit was how you got scientific people involved in activism, going up to Capitol Hill and talking to representatives on the Hill. That blew me away. I mean, if you can get some scientists up there, typically, or in their universities or whatever, doing their thing, I thought this man has something going on to be able to. How do you train people? First of all, I think our audience would like to know that you actually put people through a little training program when they're at the Blue Vision Summit before they head to talk to people on Capitol Hill. So what do you do?
Well, part of it is just, and a lot of the Blue Vision Summit is focused on this Healthy Ocean Hill Day. So this year it was very exceptional. It was the largest citizen lobby for ocean conservation in history. We had people in 24 state delegations, 163 meetings, including direct meetings with 9 senators and more than 25 House members to oppose offshore drilling, to support an IUU pirate fishing bill. The training's pretty simple. You link people, set up meetings with their elected representatives, and you remind them that we're their employees. That we've elected these people. They work for us, not the other way around. So you don't be intimidated. You focus on the issues of concern. And it's great when we bring in, as we did, people from Colorado and Arizona and Vermont, inland states, to say that every state's an ocean state. That kind of surprised our elected officials. A lot of the young students, the high school kids from the Harbor School in New York, got a lot of attention from their elected officials, and also scientists, as you say. It was very funny. After the Hill Day, one of these very bright, smart scientists came up to me and said, "I just didn't realize that you can just have a meeting with your congressman." And the training is a lot just about being yourself, understanding your issues, but not being afraid to say, "I don't know," if you're asked a question. Say, "I'll get back to you." And if you're talking to an ocean champion, one of our friends, and Ocean Champions is one of the groups we work with, PAC for the Seas, for ocean health. You get back to them if they have questions, but if they're friends of ours, ask what you can do for them as well. And after this amazing Hill Day, where we really promoted some issues, going back to your home district, or your congressional district or state, and keeping the pressure on. I mean, with our opposition to new proposed drilling off the Atlantic and in the Arctic Ocean, other than the California delegation, we didn't have a lot of support in our meetings, but we were setting down our markers. We're telling people that it's going to cost them politically to support drilling for more fossil fuels in our public seas, and that it makes no sense, and that makes even less sense than in the past. When we stopped offshore drilling under the Reagan administration in the 1980s, it was energy versus marine pollution. Today, it's also a product liability issue. This product uses directed petroleum, overheats your planet and acidifies your ocean, kills life in our seas, because warmer, more acidic oceans also hold less dissolved oxygen, which may be fine if you're a jellyfish or microbial map, not so much if you're bony fish or marine mammal or human who depends on them. So one of these scientists, and again, I love the engaged scientists like Jeremy Jackson and Nancy Knowlton and Daniel Pauly, who was our science winner in the Benchleys this year. A lot of them are less engaged, but the younger people are coming on. They're realizing that there's no point to just study the ocean so you can document its collapse in real-time digital video. And so particularly younger scientists and graduate students want to be engaged citizens and use their science to impact policy. But one of the scientists said to me afterwards, says, he's trying to explain the science to this congressman. He didn't seem to get it. I go, think sharks. You're not going to educate your congressman. They're like sharks. They respond to limited stimulus, money or votes. And in our case, we're trying to mobilize the votes. We're trying to create a sea party of engaged citizens who are going to let them know that no matter how much the oil and gas industry pays them, if they alienate their constituents back home on the beach, they're not going to be there long. One of our ocean champions, Representative Sam Farr, who was there on our opening night on a panel on how we build a social movement, and he's told me, he says, here in California, you can get elected or lose your job based on your position on coastal protection and offshore oil. So our challenge, my last book I wrote was The Golden Shore, California's Love Affair with the Sea. The challenge is how we spread our salty Kool-Aid to the rest of the country.
Exactly, the Kool-Aid. This terminology, this Kool-Aid. Ken Niedemeyer talks about drinking the Kool-Aid too, but his coral Kool-Aid. And you got your own brand of Kool-Aid, and I love it.
It's actually an analogy we probably shouldn't use. It goes back to mass suicide in the jungles of Guyana. But, it's like the war analogies that everybody uses, or the football analogies. I'd rather we develop, good oceanic analogies. We're a rising tide. We're the next wave of change. The Sea Party, it's kind of based on the Tea Party, but I figure we have, better costumes and a better cause. And way more fun. In fact, let me show you. Jim Toomey, cartoonist who's on your program, did this logo for the Tea Party, Sea Party. It's a moray eel wrapped around a Poseidon's trident. It says, Sea Party 2016, don't spill on us. Don't spill on me.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You know, when I was sitting in the audience watching that panel, and listening to Ralph Nader speak, and I was, in just a few words, he basically said, "This is how it works," and he just rolled out how to do a grassroots launch, and it was very simple. It's just that we're not used to doing that kind of thing. It's always somebody else that's been doing it, and we just go about our business. So getting people to engage and actually do what they think or always thought other people did, but they didn't do, getting them to engage in that. This has been your challenge, I assume, but there's so many young people involved. I was thinking as I was there, seeing all these young people, all these young scientists, I thought, you know, the dive industry is really missing out. If we want to get young people involved in the dive industry, we really need to engage the scientific community. You know, they're so active, and to be able to go up on the hill, these young people, these 20-somethings going up on the hill and being very vocal about what they expect from their elected representatives, it really blew my mind. You're doing something really special.
Well, it was a great panel. I mean, that first opening night, our celebration of the sea, it was a panel with Ralph Nader and, as I said, Sam Farr, the congressman from here in California, and Roger Berkowitz, who's the CEO of Legal Seafoods. And the truth is, I sort of, it's how to build social movement. I wasn't sure it would work, but the three of them were at our founding dinner back in 2004. So I thought it would be, for nostalgia's sake, worth it. But it was actually worth it at the level of how you build a social movement, which is make the connections, understand that politics isn't a dirty word. It's how people mobilize, and that if you don't have the money, you have to mobilize both the votes and the visibility. And Roger made a really good point, which is when you take a local cause like restoring Boston Harbor, you create these broad coalitions, and that's what I like about the ocean. It creates very unique coalitions. I mean, when we created in the 1970s the Clean Water, the Clean Air Act, they were unusual coalitions. The Clean Air Act was a coalition of not just environmentalists, but the public health sector and the steel workers who were most exposed, the first exposed to the pollutants. With the ocean, we have a huge recreation industry in recreational diving, surfing, kayaking, boating. We have essential services, ports, trade and transportation, recreation, but also protein and fishing can be done sustainably. You have, waterfront tourism and real estate that is literally worth trillions of dollars. And bringing these sectors together has huge impact. I mean, I really think that the Sea Party against offshore oil should be, there are already 60 coastal cities who have taken out resolutions against this idea. But we had the Center for a Blue Economy there talking about the trillions that depend on healthy oceans. And we had great examples. One example I always use is the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. It's the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere. And when they cleaned up their pollution, their air and water pollution, and these lawsuits from surrounding communities whose health had been impacted, the lawsuits went away. The ports expanded for the first time in a decade. And you see that, that protecting the ocean actually and the ports and the bays actually protects the economy. And the example is a port complex where $1 billion of goods a day crosses these docks. Nothing was happening because of the impacts of pollution. When you cleaned up, business improved. And it's across the board. When we had folks from efforts like the Port Orford, Oregon, a group of family fishing group that's, started with 16 fishing families that got tired of waiting. So they realized there were problems with overfishing and pollution. Rather than wait for the state or the federal government to act, they acted on their own. And over the last 20 years, they've cleaned up their watershed, their uplands and their woods, and they've educated their kids in their schools, and they've brought a university marine lab to set up a field station in town. And they even went out and they designated a no-take zone within their own fishing grounds. When the state finally came around 20 years later to calling for marine protected areas, they already understood the benefits and marked them out. And when the state wouldn't put buoys out, they put them out themselves to market so that California fishermen wouldn't come along and steal their fish. And this is, the best marine protected areas in the world are the ones that are created by local fishermen and communities who understand the value of restoring the resource that's also their livelihoods, that's also their stoke.
We need a T-shirt, David. This is the T-shirt. It's going to say, "Protect the ocean." It's the economy, stupid. Really, it is. But we haven't made that connection until recently, when you bring this big coalition together, and it's not just one, as you say, it's many people have an interest in protecting the ocean, and we're like the 98%.
Yeah, it's very hard to. I mean, part of the problem with the oceans, you don't see the damage as clearly. A clear-cut forest, it's they create these beauty strips along the highways that are 3 trees thick, but it's easy to get up in the air and see the damage. And until recently, it's been hard to see the impacts of trawl drags across the bottom, which have been compared to clear-cutting the ocean bottom. It's you drag these heavy chains across the bottom and destroy all the complex habitat that's essential for life. It's hard to see, the nutrient pollution until it creates these giant dead zones in the water. And even then, it's only the fishermen who realize that the fish have died off or fled. So it's education. We do have today. We have incredible tools of remote access and everything from advanced IMAX cameras to GoPros that you can put at the tip of your surfboard. But it's interesting to me that the difference between surfers and divers is surfers got organized 30 years ago with the Surfrider Foundation to do ocean conservation. Why is that? I think it's because surfers, like seals, are kind of the canaries in the coal mine. They would go out, in the 1980s to get their stoke in the waves and come in with gastrointestinal diseases and ear infections, and started realizing that after every rain they were getting sick. And so, excuse me. And so they realized that in order to continue to enjoy the ocean, they had to deal with the pollution. And Surfrider Foundation was formed, in the 80s. Then they had an oil spill at Huntington Beach, and they were out there with signs reading, "No way, dude, we don't want your crude." Divers are a little different. I mean, this Wednesday I'm talking to the Marin Dive Club. In California and parts of Florida, divers dive local. In New Jersey, rec divers dive local. But for the most part, recreational divers are away divers. They're vacation divers, and it may took longer. Surfers are in the water every day exposed to the pollution. Divers go to beautiful places. And in 2001, just for example, I was in Fiji as a reporter looking at coral bleaching and diving. 2009, after one of our summits, I went off with my dive buddy thinking I'd take a break. When I got there, I found the ghost reefs of Kondavu. Where we were diving, there were organized gangs of poachers. Outside the reef line were the longliners stripping away the sharks and the big tuna. Inside the reef line, there were these organized teams going out at night, diving and just taking everything in the water. And even in that context, Scott and I were shocked, and these Texans we were diving with hardly noticed that the big trevally and shark and barracuda that should have been there were not there. And so we left the vacation and went to Suva, the capital, and did the investigative reporting to confirm what was obvious, talking to Greenpeace and the university and the fisheries ministry, realizing there were, poachers going in, and because the military junta was in power at the time, because of corruption, nothing was being done, kickbacks were being given. This is a global challenge that divers are beginning to discover. Divers who went, to the Great Barrier Reef or Fiji or these other places 40 years ago are finding the damage, in the Caribbean, seeing the decline of the corals. When I talked about being a 15-year-old kid discovering the wonders of the Florida Keys, it was 90% live coral cover at the time. Today it's 5 to 10%. And so I think we're reaching that breaking point where divers like surfers 20, 30 years ago are beginning to realize, going back to places and seeing the damage and realizing that it's time to engage that. And the dive industry in particular, I mean, here's an industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry that's completely dependent on having a healthy ocean with healthy kelp forests and coral reefs. And this is the kind of coalitions we talked about at the summit. We need to create what I call ORCA, the Ocean Recreation and Conservation Alliance of industry and activists and users. I think with something like Blue the Dive that launched at the last DEMA conference in Las Vegas, one of my favorite dive destinations, Las Vegas, Nevada. But I think, bottom up, top down, I think with diving, it may be from the center out. I mean, it may start with, progressive dive shops, including some of the dive shops I've talked to and at in Colorado, of all places. High proportion of divers who seem very engaged. I mean, places like, and we also, during the summit, we had a dive shop in DC that supported one of our evening parties, not only to drink like fish, but to engage that community. And I think when you have the surfers and the kayakers and the stand-up paddlers and the divers unified, you realize that, it's a multi-billion industry that engages tens of millions of people. And just like I say, we get so much from the ocean in terms of just recreation, transportation, trade, energy, protein, medicinal values, and just spiritual values, just that sense of awe and wonder, being part of something bigger than ourselves, that we really need to get organized and give something back.
When I read your article, where did I put it? Your article about the Sea Party, you and Nader wrote that Sea Party article that came out in the Huffington Post. And one of the things you talked about was creating this kind of a coalition of all these different people who all care about the ocean for one reason or another, but we all share our love and our need for the ocean. But one of the things you did tell us in that article, which kind of shocked me, was that even though the Obama administration seems to be very forward-thinking, what was coming out is that this whole idea of the drilling along the East Coast, and then the drilling in the Arctic, and you, in your article at the very end, you said it reminded you of back in the days of Santa Barbara, when there was an oil spill there, and that was the birth of the environmental movement as you knew it. And this was just days before that oil spill, that oil leak happened in Santa Barbara again. Like this is history repeating itself. This is unbelievable.
It's awful. It's at a much smaller scale, but it's still a reflection of what happens whenever you go into the ocean with oil. I mean, this was a pipeline that burst that was completely part of the network. It was oil piped ashore from the offshore rigs that were grandfathered in after the '69 spill. And it was completely corroded, and it was the one pipeline that didn't have automatic shutoff valves because this company pumping Exxon oil had gotten a court ruling 15 years ago. And obviously, since the county didn't get to oversee it, they ignored their pipe, let it corrode. It had multiple warnings before it burst, and a lot of that oil followed gravity right back into the ocean. This is a clear warning that it's insane to be doing this at this point in history. I mean, I've been on offshore rigs both in Santa Barbara and in the Gulf of Mexico, and we had an oil spill right here in my home waters in Richmond, California in 2007. I left that spill to fly to the Persian Gulf and be with the Coast Guard, where they're guarding, this is the U.S. Coast Guard sending their best cutters to guard the offshore oil terminals of Iraq. So, we're having this global system where we're promoting and defending a fossil fuel energy system that, coal and oil were fine energy systems for the 16th and 19th century, but we're in the 21st century and the science is in. and we have to get off fossil fuels sooner rather than later. So the challenge is huge. As you mentioned, in 1969, we had, I mean, the history of offshore oil is a history of entering new frontier waters, having disasters, then moving on to new frontier waters where we have larger disasters. So offshore drilling started just south of Santa Barbara on oil piers in Summerlin, California. And by 1901, the San Jose Mercury News reported the town a slime with oil spillage. And Santa Barbara refused to have any oil platforms, oil piers off there. And it took the federal government 60 years to convince the folks in Santa Barbara that the technology of drilling was so advanced it could never happen again. And it didn't happen for 3 days. It was the third day Union Oil was drilling that it had a blowout and this massive spill in 1969. And the oil-covered seabirds in Santa Barbara the same year that the Cuyahoga River caught fire in Cleveland, Ohio. Those two events kind of kickstarted the modern environmental movement. And last month's spill in Santa Barbara is a reminder that that movement hasn't achieved its aim, that in 1969, when President Nixon came to the beaches of Santa Barbara, he was greeted by thousands of angry people saying, "Get oil out." Well, now President Obama, I mean, when he was elected, I saw that picture of him body surfing Sandy's Beach. And I figured he body surfs, I body surf, I love the ocean, he body surfs. I don't think so much in terms of ocean love. I think that environment's not his issue. We saw it in 2010 when the BP disaster was spreading across the Gulf, and he seemed to consider it an inconvenience and distraction from his other issues. That was a moment when he could have called for, a transition off fossil fuel, and like Kennedy calling for the moonshot, he could have said in 10 years we're going to be 50% off of fossil fuels. Instead, the G7 just says we're going to be off them by the end of the century. The science tells us that's too late. We're going to be broiling by then. We're going to blow through 2 degrees Celsius warming. And that's the fear. If we go offshore, if we keep drilling, if we keep, mining, if it goes beyond 2 degrees Celsius, then you go from disastrous impacts, which we're already feeling, to potentially civilization-ending impacts of massive changes in our ocean, which is the crucible of life for our planet.
Right.
So we're going to not let that happen. We're going to just build a movement to stop that nonsense.
Well, people need to know that the 1/3 of what we know as being reserves need to stay in the ground. We cannot take everything out. But of course, there's this window now where we're seeing all of this activity of trying to get the oil out while they can get past consumers and citizens saying no.
George W. Bush admitted we're addicts to petroleum, and the industry's like, all I need is another quick fix. The reality, the Science magazine, peer-reviewed study, as you said, 1/3 of the oil and 80% of the coal has to remain in the ground if we're going to avoid disaster. And the idea of President Obama, who created a national ocean policy, which is supposed to look at the different uses of the ocean and coordinate them for the benefit of the public and the public seas, he's sort of ignoring his own ocean policy in promoting what he calls all of the above energy policy, which is no policy, which is a free-for-all. And the idea to be drilling off the Atlantic and in the Arctic frontier waters. We had Paul Zunfeld, the commandant of the Coast Guard at the Blue Vision Summit, and he talked about a black swan incident. And he's told me as well that if we drill in the Arctic at this point in time, there's going to be a disaster, and they don't have the capacity to prevent it. The oil spill response capacity, the search and rescue capacity, even the aids to navigation, they're not up there in the Arctic Ocean. In December 2012, Shell Oil ran its big rig aground right off Kodiak Island, and the Coast Guard investigation suggested criminal penalties should be brought by Maine Justice Department. We're still in the 5-year anniversary of the BP disaster, when BP took me out on their deep rigs 15 years ago. And I asked the rig boss, what happens if you get a blowout a mile or two down? He goes, well, I don't know. I guess we'll find out when it happens. 10 years later, in 2005, 5 years ago, we found out it was the largest oil spill and toxic disaster in the U.S. history, and completely preventable. As we know, all these frontier waters, it becomes a competition to do it cheaper and faster. When I was on those rigs in the Gulf, they all wore T-shirts like "deeper, faster." They were going for new records, not for safety records. And we know that because a federal judge has now ruled it was gross negligence on the part of BP. And it was gross negligence what happened 2 years ago up in the Arctic when that rig went aground because Shell decided to take it out of Dutch Harbor in winter and tow it down to Seattle in order to avoid some Alaska taxes if it wintered over in Dutch Harbor. That's how you had that disaster. And now the people of Seattle are rising up. 20 of them were arrested yesterday trying to blockade the next rig that they want to drag up there. I mean, this is a disaster. The Coast Guard, which is the lead agency, has already said potential disaster. The scientists have said disaster at many levels. They move forward essentially because the U.S. has become like Saudi Arabia and Iran and Russia, a petrostate. Now, the difference is we can take to the streets and we can vote, and they won't even shoot us down. So why aren't we?
Yeah, because we're doing business as usual, and this has got to stop.
And that's the challenge. I mean, the idea of the Sea Party is we're going to show up at every candidate's event, and we're going to say, what about the public seas? What about the blue and restoring the blue in our red, white, and blue? And we're going to create the visibility, and we're going to work with people who live in these exposed areas, and we're going to, as we did on May 13 when we went and put our markers down, we're going to let politicians know that they can't get away with this anymore. It's like broadcast news, we're angry, we're not going to take it anymore. And, Morris the moray eel here is going to be our emblem.
Yeah, I was talking to Rob Stewart, and then I presented his movie Revolution to
I just saw it.
Oh, isn't it an amazing movie? And I was telling people why they need to come and see the movie. It was a fundraiser for our community, but that was one of the reasons they needed to come. But I said, here are some of the things that are brought up in this movie, and the eyes just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I said, and if you're not angry now, then there's something wrong with you. And the people are just like, oh, this is going on. I mean, people are oblivious, but when they know, they can't not know. So this is the beauty.
Reef Relief, which is one of the first groups I got to profile as a journalist back in the 90s when I was doing green means, and they were putting buoys up so that people wouldn't drop their anchors on the reefs. And they had a bumper sticker that said, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. So I think it's harder to, for most people, if you go to the beach, I mean, today, the show this morning, one of the major, morning shows, was all about sharks again. That, it was tragic. 2 kids were bit by sharks in North Carolina this weekend. But there have been 16 non-fatal shark attacks this year in the U.S. And yet, they're going to have shark control legislation. I mean, because 36,000 people a year die of shark attack. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's guns, I'm thinking, not shark attack. It's just our priorities are way off. And it's, I've swum with lots of sharks, and it's great. I'm not of the school that says shark's the new dolphin. I'm more of the school that says if there's not something bigger and meaner than you are out there, it's not really wilderness. I like seeing sharks. I respect them. They're top predators. So are we. We got to have mutual respect here. They're not targeting us, and we should stop targeting them. But, the real threats, I mean, I've been, my injuries have involved stupid things I've done with my dive gear, stepping on a sea urchin, swimming in polluted water and coming out with horrible Pseudomonas infections. I mean, it's the microbes and the algae that are going to get us, not the sharks and the rays. And we got to just educate people that, the real risk is, we're shark central here in California. I mean, this is where the white sharks are healthy. As one of the scientists told me, the white shark population rebound is a good sign for the ecosystem and problematic for recreational water users. Um, but but nobody's died in the last 2 years from shark bite here. But a guy died last year, a 71-year-old open water swimmer in Southern California, from a massive staph infection. He went in the water 24 hours after a rainstorm, and within 3 days he was dead from a massive antibiotic-resistant staph infection that's clearly linked to storm drains and the pollution, and is why we're told not to swim in the ocean for 72 hours after a rainstorm. When I was a kid, if you got a cut, my mom would say, go in the water because, the ocean was good. It would heal you. And, and in so many ways, the ocean used to be able to heal you. We got to get back to that state where it's physically not dangerous because of pollution, where it's alive because we haven't overfished, where it's accessible because we create the ability to, the great thing with California as a model, we have the Coastal Commission. We've just created this network of protected areas, kind of like putting our world-class park system in the water column. But the coastal protection goes back to the 1970s. One of the effects of the Santa Barbara oil spill is 3 years later, we passed a Coastal Conservation Act. And the Coastal Commission here, it not only stops unsound development on the shoreline, but maybe equally as important, it guarantees public access. And so you don't have, like in New Jersey, where you drive along the shore and there's no place to park and there's no access to get onto the beach. Here, every 1,000 feet or so, there's public access to the beach because, and why things work here, I think, is because people have a sense of entitlement. They understand the beach and the ocean belongs to all of us. And so you have this sort of democracy of blue interest where, no single industry like oil and gas in Louisiana dominates our coastline. And so we have these very tenacious and conflicted battles over change, but the endpoints tend to come out for the good because the Navy argues with the surfers who argue with the fishermen, and the scientists, or bring their voices into the debate. And in the end, so many people are so engaged with the ocean that we tend through this process, this very disruptive process of democracy, to come out with good solutions: coastal protection, a network of marine protected areas offshore. I wrote about it for Alert Diver magazine, and got some outraged emails from scuba divers who are still spearfishing. But mostly, most divers today, it's like, take only pictures, leave only bubbles. As a kid, I'd be, spearfishing. I'll still occasionally make a grab at a lobster and get humiliated by a crustacean. But most of us understand that, you can't just take. You gotta appreciate what's there and rebuild what's there. And the good news is, I was just visiting yesterday with friend Dirk, who runs ROVs, does surveys of these marine protected areas off California. And we've had protection around the Channel Islands for 7 years. He's seen in video documented this tremendous comeback of the moray eels and the big lobsters and the black sea bass. And he talks about seeing lots of boffs. He says big old fat females. Not a line you'd use in a bar, but it's what you want among fish, because the big females, they're more fecund and productive, and their eggs have greater viability. And it's once marine wildlife starts coming back, it comes back like boomers. I mean, in my book, I have a whole chapter in the Golden Shore called Return of the Beasts. When you do the right things, there's still tremendous resiliency in the ocean. Here in the Pacific, the California current and one of the world's great uprisings has allowed for this tremendous comeback once we did marine mammal protection and Clean Water Act and coastal protection. We were down at one point in the late 19th century. There were an estimated 20 to 100 elephant seals left after we wiped out the whales, and we almost wiped them out. And we're taking elephant seals for their oil from their blubber. And then we started to develop a different ethic, kind of mixing the frontier ethic with an environmental one, realizing that this was our last best frontier, this blue ocean. And in 1990, the first elephant seal hauled up on this beach down by Hearst Castle. And in 1992, they were the first breeding pair. And last year, 27,000 elephant seals returned to this one beach to molt and breed. 135,000 come down from the Arctic every year now to molt and breed along our shore. And it's just, and we have clean ports. And even the Navy has, took me out on a helicopter salt ship that burns 1/3 the fuel of any other ship of its class. And of course, they moved it into San Diego. The captain said, well, we've got this great hybrid propulsion system of, turbine and diesel electric. Of course, we're gonna base it here in California because Californians care. I drive by Vandenberg, which is this great empty space in central California where they fire missiles off towards Antarctica. And they have an agreement with the Coastal Commission. They don't fire their missiles over the Channel Islands during seal pupping season. And so again, you have this odd mix of militarism and environmentalism that makes the economy work. Respecting the ocean is a way to expand our economy and keep a way of life that I think other people may be a tad jealous of.
These are the kinds of interesting connections that are happening that I would never have thought of. The Navy and environmentalists seem seemingly strange bedfellows, but this is what's happening now. The tide is turning when you see that kind of thing, I think.
Right. I mean, there's always conflict. The Navy and environmentalists are butting heads over use of active sonar that's damaging and killing whales and marine mammals. But at the same time, the Secretary of Navy has said that he wants to see the sea services, the Navy, the Marines, Coast Guard, 50% fossil fuel by 2025. He's way ahead of his boss, the president, in moving towards this. And the captain on board the Macon Island, the ship I was on, says this is a transitional ship. This is not the green fleet of the future, but we're moving towards that. And the ports and the shipping industry are finding ways. One of our past Peter Benchley Ocean Award winners, Geraldine Natz, who was the executive director of the Port of LA, after they cleaned up their ports, she became and is today the executive director of the International Association of Ports and Harbors. They have 50 major ports that are both working on reducing their own climate impacts and emissions. They've also set up a system where any container ship that is above international standards for clean propulsion gets a 15% dockage fee discount at one of these 50 major global ports. And, that's $150,000 saving. I mean, that's the kind of incentive that encourages innovation to clean up our shipping and our seas. So the solutions are there and they're exciting, and the challenge is to engage enough people that the old reactionary attitudes of the status quo can be moved. That can move beyond overfishing, beyond pollution, beyond fossil fuels, and hopefully in time that the natural resiliency of the ocean is still in place.
You talk about 50 ways to save the ocean. Can you give us some ways, right off the top of your head, the way dive businesses can save the ocean?
Sure. I mean, one is just engaging, as you train up divers, engage them to understand the fragility of the environment. So you don't touch the coral. You don't, you, as I said, take only pictures, leave only bubbles. Then practice your neutral buoyancy so you're not kicking your fins across the top of the coral. You're not, reaching and grabbing things with open hands that can, take that protective slime off the fish and the corals. But also, look at the packaging. I mean, I have a dive shop that complained to the manufacturers about all the plastic that their masks were coming in. I mean, the mask doesn't need, to be bubble wrapped. Just setting standards. I have a whole section on sort of dive etiquette and boating etiquette. But beyond that, things we don't think of as protecting the ocean, the food choices we make, not just sustainable seafood, but eating more organic and vegetarian. Because I talked about the dead zone. The UN's identified over 400 coastal dead zones, and that's where the nutrients from all the synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. In the Midwest, in our farm belt, we put 140 pounds of fertilizer for every acre of corn. And it's too much, and the excess follows gravity down the watershed into the Mississippi River, and every spring it grows a second crop of algae in the Gulf of Mexico. So, eating more organic means less application of synthetic, petroleum-based additives, and eating, organic and local. The more local you can eat, the more sustainable. It also reduces the transportation load of burning fossil fuels to bring winter plums in from Chile, or, and if you're eating locally and sustainably, you're also more aware of what's local, including what's local in your water. So in New Jersey, instead of ordering, shrimp from some shrimp farm in Indonesia and salmon that's also probably grown in a polluted farm in Chile, order the quahog clams that are local and have been restored because local activists like the Littoral Society and Clean Ocean Action have cleaned up the water. So you have clams, quahogs, and you have tilefish, and you have, striped bass. And in California here, we have our Dungeness crab season. And as much as I respect my friend Sylvia Earle, who doesn't eat any fish and says no market, no hunter-based market system has ever worked, market hunting, I still find that a salmon I've caught myself and take up to Petaluma to have smoked is probably the most delicious meal I'll ever have. I love our Dungeness crabs, raw oysters that have that fresh snap and taste of the sea. I'll eat any, fish or crustacean or bivalve or cephalopod, I'll have some. I won't eat shrimp, but I'll have, fried calamari and beer and watch the Giants win another World Series. Any critter that has a fighting chance. The problem is my menu options are shrinking as overfishing continues. What we have to do is I talk about eating sustainable seafood, although at our Peter Benchley Ocean Awards dinners, at all our events, our Blue Frontier events, we'll serve gourmet vegetarian because that's even more sustainable than sustainable seafood. And quite frankly, after years in the marine conservation community, I just got sick of having seafood at every one of our events. It's like the forest protection groups don't have bonfires every time they get together.
Exactly. I got to tell you, I really appreciated you not having seafood, because I'm like Sylvia. I do not eat seafood. I do not eat fish. I just can't bear it. I cannot bear it. So, and it doesn't mean that I love it, but I can't.
And it's understandable because it's not done sustainably. On our fishing panel, we had, along with this, Port Orford group of sustainable fishing families, we had a guy, Brent from Long Island, who's an aquaculturist. He's raising clams and sea veggies, kelps, and it's actually improving water quality. And this may be a lot of the future. The seafood is eating much lower on the food chain, instead of turning, and it's also better for your health. This is the other thing in writing 50 Ways to Save the Ocean. I discovered that what's good for the ocean tends to be good for you in terms of either your health, your pocketbook, just your sense of well-being. And so, eating lower on the food web. As I say, eat more vegetarian. Meat is also water intensive, creates a lot of coastal pollution. The hog farms that created massive algae blooms off North Carolina years ago. Today, they've cleaned up the hog farms to a certain degree, but now they're faced with the threat of sea level rise and offshore drilling. Our winners of the Hero of the Seas Award for 2015 are the heads of the North Carolina and South Carolina Coastal Federations, Todd Miller and Dana Beach, who between their organizations, they've saved over 1 million acres of coastal land from development. They've planted over 1 billion oysters and natural oyster reefs are reemerging. All this tremendous work, all of which is a threat because this is ground zero for where they want to do new offshore drilling. And so we have to, we never have final victories. It's a process. We have to keep pushing to restore the ocean as others are pushing to destroy it. And, and we have to educate people. Even environmentalists, a lot of them still think that, the environment ends at the water's edge. and sort of ignore that 95% of living habitat that's saltwater. You say correctly, like Sylvia, you choose not to eat fish. I've talked to people who say, well, I'm a vegetarian, I just eat fish. Like, like marine wildlife isn't wildlife.
It makes no sense. And I mean, this is the thing, is that we have blinders on, so we need to have people wake us up. And then when we start to get a little bit awake, come out of our dozy sleep, then we start to question conventional wisdom, and then it becomes almost like a habit.
Well, it's a strange thing, and I think since Blue Frontier was created, I've seen this kind of shift where we've gone from it's not a problem, popular perception, not a problem, not a problem. Oh my God, it's a disaster. What can we do? There's nothing we can do. We're sort of at that stage where people are beginning to understand that that humans, in fact, are impacting the ocean at a global level, and that there are disasters. And now, well, we've got people in sort of the shock surprise phase before they get distracted by the next, digital distraction. We have to start explaining that there are also solutions. They're not only problems, they're solutions you can be a part of. And when you become a part of the solutions, you're actually engaged in reality. You have less time for reality TV, and the Kardashians become less relevant to your life than taking your kids to a beach and knowing they're not going to get sick when they go in the water.
Yeah. It just seems to me that we are getting to that stage, that we are getting really close. People are waking up, and it's up to us in the industry to be the educators, because we're the ones who are we are the guides. We take people into the water, we take them under the waves, so we're the natural ones to raise awareness about the solutions that are open to us, that are available. And the big one, of course, is what you've been doing, and that is impacting on political will.
It's just insane to me that the dive industry, which is probably the recreational industry most dependent on healthy habitat, has not been more engaged. I mean, I wrote Saved by the Sea in part because traumas me and the ocean have been through over the last 50 years. But it's what I told Sylvia when she felt the documentary on her, Mission Blue, was too personal. Saying, like, Sylvia, people don't love groupers for the most part. You love groupers. Most people love people. They want to hear the stories of people's engagement with the ocean. And that's how they get back into the ocean, because they can relate to something in their own life. And for me and my late love, Nancy, it was diving was, something that for her, I got her certified for her 30th birthday, and it was in the cold, icy waters of Monterey. It was a particularly cold day with, snow on the mountaintop. She got out with purple lips, very kind of thrilled but half frozen, and that was half her birthday present. And the second half was, a few weeks later, taking her to the Great Barrier Reef. And, and it was a present for me too. I mean, this was like getting to the coral heart of our blue planet. And diving's been so essential a part of my life, and that sense since I was a kid that there is this alien world that we can go visit and be a part of. And when she passed, we had a memorial on one of her favorite beaches here because you look out to sea, and it's also solace. You realize you're a part of something larger than yourself, even when large parts of your own soul have drifted off. And 5 years later, that beach was being cleaned up by people and, dressed up in hazmat suits because of the Costco Busan oil spill. And it was sacrilege to me. It was a desecration. So we have to, do the right things. And I can't think of anybody more appropriate to do the right things for our ocean than divers, than the 8 million plus certified divers in the US and the millions more around the world, because we have the privilege of actually seeing below the surface, of actually understanding that it's not all smooth and faceless or tumultuous, but it's more than the water. It's the crucible of life. It's where we all come from, and we get to go back. We all come from salt water. As divers, we get to go back there a bunch of times and hopefully understanding the wonder, we also have to be those who give the warning. One if by land, two if by sea.
Yes, we have to take responsibility for all that we are given, and take responsibility for the future. I completely agree with you, and the big pressure for us is that our mindset shift has to be moving from the ocean as a backdrop to recognizing, not just recognizing, but our behavior needs to be in alignment in understanding that it's the backbone of our business, and it's the backbone of the world.
Yeah, whenever I'm inland, everybody wants to go to the beach anyway, but somebody says, well, why should we care about the ocean? It's like, let's take a deep breath and think about that. And oh yeah, half that breath is from, generated by algae in the ocean. It's not like creates half our oxygen. It's the driver of climate and weather, and it's the source. It brings the rain that feeds our crops, and it's that cycle of vapors that's that allows for the circle of life. And I don't know. For some of us, body surfing's how I get my adrenaline thrills, and diving is how I calm down.
Yeah, exactly. I love can you read from your book? I would like you to read something from your book.
I'd love to. Here's the book, the photograph. Unfortunately, that's not me with the right whale. That's a picture taken by my friend Brian Skerry. And I'll just read the very end, which is sort of after discussing the first 50 years or so. I talk about my present state. I say, well, I've gone from radical activist to war reporter, private investigator, TV producer, author, and activist again. I do so with a more sober assessment than when I was young, running wild in the streets, chanting power to the people, a slogan recently appropriated for a battery-powered Oral-B toothbrush ad. Today, I don't really expect a revolution in either politics or consciousness to radically alter the cascading ecological collapse of our ocean planet. I do, however, note a rising line of ecological mindfulness approaching the declining plane of biological diversity on our water world. And where that X crosses will tell us how much is left to save and restore, if we can. Not sure it'll be enough to turn the tide. All I know for certain is if we don't try, we lose. And this salty blue world of ours is too heart-achingly beautiful, scary, and sacred to lose. If you don't believe me, join the space program, travel out into the cosmos, and look back from the heavens. It's not God's green earth, it's God's blue marble.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. It's definitely heartfelt.
That's why we're here. And that's why we're here to do this summit, and that's why we're all here together. All of us around the world are here because of that.
And I appreciate what you're doing. I'm hoping that it's just another movement of the tide that's going to turn in a good direction. I know bringing, and using these tools to bring people from all over the world to talk about it and hopefully impact the business, because we need that. I think every sector, diving and shipping and ports and the sea services, they need to come together. We've had two major ocean reports in the last decade, the Independent Pew Ocean Commission and the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy, and very different makeups. It included, elected officials and scientists and environmentalists on the Pew Commission, which was headed up by Leon Panetta, who went on to become head of CIA and Secretary of Defense under Obama, and former chief of White House, and also a Peter Benchley policy winner. But that was a very different panel from the George Bush appointed U.S. Ocean Commission that was headed up by a former Navy chief of naval operations, admiral, and had oil industry and academics and others. Both commissions reached very similar conclusions, which is the ecological decline of our public seas is a threat to our economy, our national security, our livelihoods, and our environment. And, out of those two commissions, we got not enough, but the recommendations were the right things. We need to begin to manage our seas, put, as Thad Allen, the former commandant of the Coast Guard, put it, we need to put sort of urban planning in the water column. We need to understand it can't be a first get there, first dump, first drill kind of attitude that it's been till now. We have to understand that the public seas belong to all of us, and there are areas for shipping, there are areas for clean energy, there are areas to be wilderness in the seas, to be our next great national parks. And if we keep the oceans healthy and reduce the runoff and the pollutants, the oil and the chemical and the plastic and the nutrient pollutions, we're just, we're reserving opportunity for ourselves, opportunities for a healthier world and a more interesting one. We can reduce probably the biological diversity of the ocean and still survive. We're a very weedy and adaptive species. We're just not going to be surviving in as interesting or exciting a world. And, like I say, we got this whole swimming pool of a world that still has a lot of diversity. We're in an extinction crisis, but it's of our own making, and we can unmake it. And that's the opportunity. This is the time in which the vital decisions are being made, and we can kind of watch YouTubes of skateboarding dogs, and I'm very impressed with dogs that can skateboard, but we can do a lot more, and hopefully hopefully forums like you've got going right here will inspire more young people and people young in spirit to be engaged and help turn the tide.
What you're saying has been reflected in what many of the other speakers have been saying, and I think what is happening is that our audience is starting to realize is that there are many hands already on deck. It is not hopeless. We need hope, but we also need to kick some blue butt, as Sylvia would say. And it's required of all of us right now to come together, and there's many of us on the task. So there's no point in saying, it's just me, what can I do? No, everybody who's listening, everybody who's watching, we are all part of the solution. And you see the caliber of people who are engaged in this already just by hearing you speak, David. It's incredible at so many levels how many people are involved in this.
And just you look at the influence of the right-wing Tea Party over the last decade. There are millions more people who are engaged in the ocean, who care about the ocean. I mean, the Tea Party is humorous, but the joke's going to be on them, on the oil industry, when they try and take our public seas away. I think that we're seeing people mobilizing all up and down the East Coast. We saw thousands of people take to the waters and the ports in Seattle this past week. So I'd encourage people to, you're totally right. It's time to kick some blue butt, and go to bluefront.org, hook up with us. We've got 30, 40 organizations like Greenpeace and the Waterkeeper Alliance and Surfrider Foundation, others, Colorado Ocean Coalition, who've signed up. We're signing up, dive shops and seafood restaurants in cities. And we're gonna be out there with a lot of young people all through the campaigns. We're gonna bring the ocean to Iowa and New Hampshire, and we're gonna make sure that climate and ocean are remembered in this election, and we're gonna make sure that whatever the final two candidates are, that they have to address our issues. And like I say, restoring the blue in our red, white, and blue, and the whole blue marble beyond is the vital work of the next months and years, and a good way to spend our time on this blue planet.
I wouldn't want to do any other thing but do this. I can tell you that right now. I believe we're all here at this point in history because we're all meant to be here to do this, and it's very clear that you are here to do this, and I'm so glad you're here, doing everything you're doing and bringing us all this valuable intel.
And it's summertime, so we got to also get wet.
And we got to get wet, absolutely. Well, listen, David, thank you so much. Just appreciate everything.
Great.
And we're going to stay in touch. And I know everybody is going to go to yourbluefrontiers.org to find out more about.
No, they should go to bluefront.org.
To Bluefront, sorry, because it's bluefront.org. Okay, sorry, Bluefront.
Good. We'll see you on the streets or on the beach.
On the beach. You'll see me on the beach.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks again.
Thank you, Lori. Take care.
You too. Bye.